Before you start Lesson 8, make sure you do Test A in the Test Masters. In Lesson 8, we'll be covering two different topics. First, we'll talk about fractions and percents, and then we'll talk about the inch ruler. Now, to compare fractions and percents, a good way to do that is to use something called a fraction circle. You just draw a circle on your paper, and one thing to keep in mind that'll make this understanding that's a whole lot easier is that a percent is just another way of writing a fraction. They both are the same thing, it just looks a little bit different. For example, 50%. You probably already know what 50% means. That means half of something, right? If you had 100 apples and ate 50% of them, then you'd have half of them left. So on a fraction circle, to represent half, you could just split that circle in two and shade in one side of it, and that would represent 1/2 or 50%. Now just think about 50%. Think about the word percent. It means per 100. So 50% is 50 per 100. 50 over 100. And so we can just say in percent form we write 50 and we put this little symbol at the end. Now the whole reason we have percent and that percent symbol at all instead of writing it just 50 over 100, isn't it a lot faster to make that symbol than to have to do the fraction bar and then 100 underneath it? So that percent symbol is just a simplified way, a faster way to write the fraction bar and the 100. Try to remember that. Percent, all that is another way to think of a fraction. Let's think of another one here. Let's split this into 4 sections and let's shade in one of those. Now we have shaded in 1/4 of the circle, or 25 over 100, 25% of the circle is shaded in. If 1/4 is shaded, that means 3/4 or 75% is not shaded. See, it has to total up. The whole circle, if you look at the whole thing, that equals 100% of the circle. So 1/4 and 3/4, that's equal to 1 whole thing. Same thing as the 25 and the 75%. If you added those together, you'd get 100%. So if you're talking about the whole circle, 100% of the circle, that's what you would say. 25% of it is shaded, 75 is not. 1/4 is shaded, 3/4 is not. Percent is just another way of writing a fraction. Let's go ahead and do some practice problems. On practice problem A and B, I want you to use that fraction circle over to the right for both of those. And for A, I want you to tell me the percent and the fraction that's shaded. Just write them in the percent form and the fraction form of the shaded circle. And then in B, I want you to write the percent and fraction form that is not shaded. So go ahead and pause the CD and try to figure those out. On A, the percent and fraction that is shaded, well, you see that there are 3 out of 5 sections that are shaded, so that would be 3/5 or 60%. You just have to look at it and say 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Each section counts as 20%, so that would be 60% is shaded. 2/5 is not shaded, so that would be 40% is not shaded. Percents are just another way to write a fraction. That's all they are. Now in C through F, what I want you to do there is use fraction circles to identify each of those fractions or percents, or to describe them basically. So on C, 20%, what you could do there is just think of 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, and I don't expect you to be perfect on breaking this into exactly 5 pieces, or 5 exactly equal looking pieces. Just do 5 and shade in one of them. Doesn't matter which one you shade in either. It's just representing 20%. If you want to go ahead and pause the CD and work the rest of them, that might be a good idea. On D, represent 1 1/4. Well, 1 means a whole circle. So you just shade in one whole circle, and then 1/4 of another one. You draw the fraction circle, break it up into quarters, shade one of those quarters in. E, 30%. What you need to do there is have a fraction circle and just think of 10, 20, 30. So you need to break it up into 10 sections. So what I would do is start out with breaking it into fifths like you did in practice problem C, and then break each of those fifths in half. That way you know you have 10, and just shade in 3 of those 10. So that would be 30%. Now in F, represent 250%. Well, remember 100% is a whole thing. So we'd have 100, 200, shade in both of those, and then a third circle that we would split in half and shade half of it in. And that would be the way you'd represent 250% using fraction circles. Now, something that I haven't really described yet, but we'll be using that in the next part of this lesson, is mixed numbers. Mixed numbers have a whole part to them and then a fraction part to them. For example, if we wanted to write practice problem F as a mixed number instead of as a percent, we would write that 2. You don't put the word and, you just say 2 and a half. And that's how you'd write that as a mixed number. You have a whole part and a fraction part. Like in practice problem D, that's 1 1/4. The whole part is the 1, the fraction part's the 1/4. Those are called mixed numbers. Being able to write mixed numbers is going to come in handy again when you're measuring things with a ruler. In this exercise, we're going to practice measuring things with an inch ruler. You'll need to get a ruler out to do this exercise, so go find a ruler if you don't have one in front of you, and then come back and turn the CD back on. Go buy a ruler if you don't have one, and come back and turn the CD on if you need to go buy one as well. Now, most inch rulers, the tick marks, those are the little marks that you see on there, those are 1/16 of an inch apart. So that line segment that I have drawn there, if you wanted to figure out how long it was, you just start from the left side and you start counting your tick marks, and you say 16th after each one. 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9/16. So you would say that that line segment was 9/16 inches long. You need to write the unit of inches down. Let's try another one. Look at that blue line segment that I have drawn there. The best thing to do is to put some little marks at the ends, and that helps you know where to start and stop. And on this one, what you should do is don't just start from the left end and start going 1/16, 2/16, and so on. Start from the first whole number inch value that you see there. And so start from the 1 inch, and so you'd know that you'd have 1 and 1/16, 2/16, 3/16. So you'd write this as a mixed number, 1 and 3/16 inches. Remember, we said mixed numbers, they have a whole number part and then a fraction part as well. Look at practice problems G and H. What I want you to do is just tell me that measurement, how far from the end of the ruler is point G and how far is point H from the end. So you're not measuring like a line segment, you're just measuring how far from the end each of those points is. If you think about it, an inch ruler is kind of like a number line, isn't it? Except the tick marks aren't like 1, 2, 3, 4. They're 1/16 of an inch apart. And the origin of the number line is over here at the very far left, at the very beginning of it. That's kind of like you can't have a negative measurement, right? On a number line you can put negative numbers, but on a ruler you can't like measure a -5 inches or something like that. So you just start at 0 always. Now on G, point G, just look at that, and hopefully you can see that that's right in the middle between 1 and 2. And you can see how that tick mark is a little bit longer than the other ones, and it's usually how a ruler works. Every quarter-inch section, the tick marks are a little bit longer than the 1/16 inch tick marks, and then at every half-inch one, those are a little bit longer, and then at every whole number, like at 1, at 2, those are the longest tick marks that you see. So that one, G, is 1 8/16, or a better way to write it is 1 1/2 inches. Now on H, you know it's going to have at least 2, and then you count over 5/16 from 2. 2 and 5/16 inches is the location of point H. And that's the location from the end of the ruler, or the origin, if you want to think about it in terms of a number line. Now practice problem I, this is where your ruler that I told you to get is going to come into play. I want you to measure the length of your Math 8-7 book. And just so you know, look at this that I'm drawing here. If this was your book, the longer side of the book, that's what I want you to measure. That's the length that I want you to measure. Usually when you're talking about something that has 2 dimensions like that, the length is the longer side and the width is the shorter side. So measure the length of your book. Just go ahead and pause the CD and measure it and turn the CD back on. Now when I measured mine, I obtained a value of 11 4/16, or a simpler way to write that would be 11 1/4 inches. If you didn't write your units down, I consider that as half credit. The number part is half credit on that answer. The inches part is the other half credit. So anytime you're doing one of these problems like this where you have a length that you have to measure and you have to have units with your answer, the units are half of the answer because they are very important. Now maybe you obtained a value like 11 3/16 or 11 5/16. If you're within a 1/16 of an inch of my answer, then I would consider that you did it correctly. Now maybe your book is just like been smashed up or something and you got a totally different answer. Most people who have a fairly new book, your answer should be within a 1/16 of an inch of mine. Okay, well that's all for lesson 8.